everybody, and welcome to What's Your Story Live. I'm your host, Carrie Rowan. It's so good to be with you here today, and I'm so glad you could join me. We're running this on Friday today. I thought I'd go back to Fridays and see if you guys like Fridays better. So hit me up in the chat and let me know if Friday works for you. But what are we here to do, and what's your story? Well, as you know, each week we talk a little bit about a morsel from my book, Tell a New Story. And today I opened up to a really cool chapter. It's chapter 5. And the cool thing about this is it's under the subtitle of intention. And we're going to talk a little bit about the intentions of our stories. But before I do that, I always like to share just a little bit about my book in general. This is my book, Tell a New Story. It talks about 5 steps, 5 really easy steps. And that's how the whole book is organized, by the 5 steps that you can help release your negative stories, right? The stories that you tell yourself and others, and bring more joy to your life when you do that, when you can release these stories and realize that some of these stories we tell might not even be so true. But why do we tell them? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Why do we tell these stories that might not make us feel good? Why do we tell these negative stories anyways? And I explained about how we have an intention, right? All of our stories, no matter what stories they are, have an intention, right? We usually have an intention behind all of our behavior. So what's the intention behind our stories? That's the question I want you to start asking yourself. We can start to look at our stories a little bit different when we say, hey, I've got an intention behind this story. What am I trying to do? Well, I'm trying to maybe perhaps feel better by telling the story. I'm just trying to connect with you. So I'm telling a story that I think we have in common. Or maybe you're trying to get somebody to laugh, right? So there's always usually some sort of an intention. It can be a positive intention or it can be a not so positive intention. And we're going to get to a little bit of the not so positive intention ones in a second with the dark side of intention. But we always have a reason. And that's why when you start to do this work and you start to uncover your own stories and you start to catch yourself telling these stories, I always tell people, just be very kind with yourself. You need to have compassion, right, when you're doing this work, because it's so easy to be like, oh, God, I'm telling that story again. Why am I telling that story? I can't stand that story. We're sick of our own stories, never mind how everybody else feels about them sometimes. So when you start to do this work, you really need to have some compassion for yourself, because I'm going to say that every story, regardless of the intention behind it, every story has a noble purpose, because we're usually trying to accomplish something with that story. I'm trying to make you laugh, or I'm trying to make you my friend, or maybe it's on a little bit of the darker side of our intentions, right? We might be telling a story because we want some pity, or we want you to feel bad for us for some reason, or maybe we don't know how to ask for help, so we're enlisting help through a story, or maybe we're telling a story because we want to tell you a secret about somebody else, and we tell it in a story way. So there's a lot of things that we can use stories for that we might not find ourselves being so proud. We might not be proud of that behavior or that story that we tell. But the coolest thing, like I said before, is not only can you have compassion for yourself, but I want you to get curious. Get curious. If you take anything away from today, it's that I want you to get curious about your stories. When you start to hear yourself tell that same story again, I want you to ask yourself, really wonder, what is my true intention behind the story? Why am I really telling the story? Because when we can get honest with ourselves about why we're telling the story, we can find out more about not only ourselves, but our stories. And then you can, parlay that into understanding other people's stories better, right? We want to understand why somebody keeps telling us that same story. So what do? We can get curious. It's so easy to get critical, right? Especially in this day and age, people are so critical and don't have a lot of tolerance for each other. But let's start to get curious. I wonder why they keep telling me that story. When you can start to get curious, your criticism just crumbles away. I want you to try that this week. If you're in a situation where you want to do that knee-jerk reaction thing, where you want to just be judgmental and criticize what somebody's doing for some reason, maybe it's online, I want you to stop for a minute and just ask yourself, that's really interesting. I wonder why they're doing that. This is really easy to do with kids, because it's always like you can step back and say, wow, that behavior that they're throwing at me right now is a little outrageous. So I wonder why they're doing that. Why are they doing that? Or why are they telling me that story? So start to get curious about your own stories and start to get curious about other people's stories. And I'm telling you, it's going to open up a whole world of understanding the people around you, and more importantly, understanding yourself and why you tell the stories that you tell. And I love to tell my clients to have just like a little journal, keep a little book with you that you can take in your bag with you or in your car. and start to jot those stories down. When you start to catch them and you start hearing one that keeps repeating, write that down. Why am I telling that? I wonder what this one's all about, right? Start writing those stories down, catch them in your story catch-all journal. And so keep that with you at all times. And then you can look back and say, I'm starting to see a little pattern here. Every time I meet with this person, we talk about this story, or they tell me that story. And write those insights down, because they can really help you manage your life and your own stories. Because I've told you this before, but I can't help but to say it again. What you put out there is what comes back to you. So that's how we realize that we're telling negative stories. We start feeling better when we put those negative stories away. And then we start telling better stories to ourselves. We start picking the good stories out. We start talking about the things that are working in our life, as opposed to all the things that are not working. And we've talked about getting over our biology, because that's how our brains are designed. So focus on using your mind to get more curious about your stories and other people's stories. And I promise it's going to blend some incredible insights into the stories that you tell, and also the stories that other people are telling. So I'd love to hear from you. If you practiced it at all this week, come down to the comment section and write me a little comment. Let me know what you found out when you stopped and tried not to judge and just got curious about somebody else's story. I'd love to hear from you. And I will leave you today with a little excerpt from my book. In that chapter, it's just a piece of a song of mine that I wrote, Souls Will Fly, it's called. And in my book, the cool thing is all my original music, not all of it, but the songs that pertain to what I'm talking about, you can find in the book through a QR code. Isn't that cool? So you just slide your device over the code and you can hear my song, Souls Will Fly. And if you don't have your copy, jump on Amazon and get one by all means. So I'm not going to read you the whole song, but I'm just going to read you the bridge, because it really pertains, which is why it's in this chapter, to this talking about the dark side of our intentions behind our stories. And the bridge says, do we really know how to love one another? When the dark side appears, we run for cover. When it's too heavy, the end's closing in, maybe that's where love begins. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Carrie Rowan. It was great to see you. Have a fabulous weekend. And until next time, don't forget, it's never too late to tell your best story. Bye.